Well, I already introduced Stephanie before, and so why don't you just take it away with what you're learning from the water quality monitoring in the Wissahickon.
Okay, so I think that we've convinced you so far that the Wissahickon is truly an urban-suburban system. And throughout the watershed, we have about 29% impervious cover. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about, not a blank screen. First I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is that we expect to see in a watershed that has this amount of impervious cover and development, and then talk about what we've actually seen in the data that we've collected at WVWA. So this here is a picture of the Wissahickon just a little bit downstream of this location. And whenever it is we have the stormwater that comes in to the creek, it brings along with it all the pollutants that are also on the land. So this includes your oil, your grit from cars, road salt, nutrients that we put on our lawns. And it comes down the creek at a very rapid pace, and this is the flooding that Sarah was talking about that we see a lot in Philadelphia. We see this throughout the entire watershed as well. Over time, that creates a lot of erosion. So this here is a bank that's about a 5-foot vertical bank shear. Over time, as that starts to fall in and continues along the creek itself is actually going to widen. When the creek widens, it ends up being shallower, so more sunlight is able to get to the stream bed. In addition, the creek is able to warm up faster. All that sediment from the creek bed, or from the creek banks, needs to go somewhere. So eventually it's going to settle out and fill in the cracks and the crevices in between the rocks that we have on the stream bed. Additionally, as Chris mentioned, we have a lot of nutrients coming down the creek, and we get a lot of algae blooms. With all these algae blooms, it seems a little counterintuitive because algae is a plant-like organism, but it actually causes decreases in oxygen at night when there's no sunlight in the system. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about what we've actually seen in the Wissahickon Creek itself with the data that we've collected. So the WVWA has been collecting data since 2004 as part of our Stream MAP program, which is the Stream Monitoring and Assessment program. And first we're going to talk about macro-invertebrates. So the macro-invertebrates are the aquatic bugs that we see in the creek. This is anything without a backbone. These are great indicators of ecosystem health, mostly because they're very long-lived. They really can't leave the location. Once they're in that creek bed, they're going to stay there until they emerge. And they have a wide variety of diversities to pollution tolerances. So you have some species that can be very pollution tolerant and can live pretty much anywhere. And then we have other species that are very pollution intolerant and really just need the most pristine system possible in order to survive. And these organisms are truly impacted by pretty much everything that happens in the creek. So they're impacted by the water quality that's flowing over them, the habitat, whether or not they have those rocks that they can hide underneath, whether or not it's flooding every few days, genuinely everything. And they give an indication of how the state of the creek over a long period of time, not just the day that we collect them. So macroinvertebrates can kind of be scored out when you collect a community that can be scored from 0 to 100. 4 is a system like this that's really simple, doesn't have a lot of diversity. It's generally pollution intolerant species. And a healthy system, so it's more like this, that has a lot of diversity, is a mixture of pollution tolerant and pollution intolerant species. Anything that falls below 50% is considered to be impaired. The Wissahickon has fallen at 20% since 2011. So this is a great indicator that we have impairments according to the macro-invertebrate community. The next thing that we look at is habitat assessments. So this is really scoring the habitat features that I talked about on that first slide. And this is obviously impacted by land use, so whether or not we're building right up to the edge of our creek, or if we're letting it to be a nice riparian buffer, and then also flow for erosion and habitat destruction. This also gets scored from 0 to 100. And a poor habitat would be something like this. It's heavily channelized. If you're a fish, you're really going to have a hard time finding a spot to live here. And then an optimal stream would look more like this, where there's a lot of habitat, a lot of diversity. Overall, the Wissahickon has fallen around at 50%. So this is considered to be a marginal habitat, and it's largely thanks to the Green Ribbon Trail that has protected the riparian buffer across the Wissahickon. That said, there are some areas that have higher habitat scores. A lot of our tributaries tend to score higher. And the picture that I used for poor is actually the sandy run. So we also have some poor habitats as well. The next is chlorides. So this is largely our road salts. Runoff and then also treated that have chlorides in it. But the main thing that we're always interested in is road salts. And again, a lower score is better for an urban-suburban system like what we have. In general, the Wissahickon has been slowly creeping up. This isn't a huge change, but there has been a slight increase since 2004. But the more interesting trends that we've seen is if you look at the seasonal trends. So the upstream is at the 0 point, and then downstream is at the 40 point here. And if we look at our seasonal trends for spring, summer, and fall, it's pretty consistent relatively low. There's a slight spike at our second site, which is our Evans-Montboro mill. But then if you add on our winter seasons, the chloride values are nearly double, and then at our furthest upstream site, it's actually 3 or 4 times the amount than what we usually see throughout the rest of the year. That site doesn't have any wastewater treatment effluent going into it, doesn't have any groundwater, and is largely just what's coming off across the road. So that gives a really great indication of what road salts are doing to the creek in the winter. Last, I'm going to talk about phosphorus. So phosphorus, as Chris has mentioned, is a nutrient for algae growth, particularly in freshwater systems. And we've been monitoring this since 2004 as well. It's impacted by runoff fertilizers that we use on our lawns, treated effluent. In general, for our systems, a lower value is better. And a healthier system had this lower value, you'd be able to see to the bottom of the creek. There wouldn't be a lot of algae on the rocks. And then, of course, a poorer system is one with a lot of algae blooms. We've seen since 2004 that the phosphorus values were really high prior to 2008. And then since 2008, there's been infrastructure improvements that have brought the phosphorus values down. These are still too high, but they do indicate that we can make a lot of improvements to the wastewater.